create new hurdles, right? And I remember those times where it was like, hey, we're tapped out, we got to hurdle up, no projects under 10,000. Hey, we're tapped out, we got to hurdle up, no projects under 30,000. Now we're doing those numbers a month. Like that's the hurdle for just 30 days of working with us now. If I could go back and teach a lesson, it would be change your hurdles faster, right? Like you get too comfortable and I think you waste too much time.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is David Salinas. He is the founder of Digital Surgeons and the current Chief Growth Officer. He led the company as a CEO for over a decade, in which time they serviced clients such as Lady Gaga and the US Open. He also built District, which is a $25 million startup and technology innovation ecosystem. David started from nothing, and he remembers trying to find coins in his sofa when he was growing up. This meant he was against the odds at every stage of his journey. He didn't go to a fancy business school, he didn't go to a fancy university. Digital Surgeons, which is now worth 8 figures, started from $5,000 and was completely bootstrapped. He's not had things handed to him on a plate, and he's got great advice for other people who want to follow his path. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, David. It's a pleasure to have you here. We've had your partner on previously from Digital Surgeons, Pete, but you've got a wider and more robust portfolio, so it's really interesting to hear your insights as well.
Hey, Amar, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be included on your podcast, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
What we're really curious to know as we start off is, how did you get involved in entrepreneurship in the first place? Is it something you always wanted to do, or what's the story there?
I think ultimately it was something I always wanted to do. It was my brother's answer was always be a doctor. I think my answer tend to vary across different interests, architecture, creativity, comedy. But what I ultimately landed on was through life, I had to learn how to make money at a very young age. And I think that ingrained in me the commercial side of business, right? And then I had a knack for experience because I worked in restaurants at a very young age. And I would watch and ask questions about how does the busboy make money, right? That's not a 12-year-old doesn't ask that question. They just go, tell me what to do. Thank you very much. I would say, like, how do I make money? And they're like, you make a percentage of the waiter's tips. How does the waiter make money? So just being curious, which is a big value in a lot of my organizations, led me to entrepreneurship, because once I started to understand how the machines work by asking lots of questions or using my intuition, sometimes you just observe things and figure it out, which I got very good at. I would always make suggestions to the people that ran the businesses, to the entrepreneurs themselves. And most often they didn't want to listen to me because I was 12 years old or 14 or 18. And what I heard from some of them was, if you want to call the shots, you should start your own business. And I was like, okay, I guess that, and that sort of like sets it off, right? And lots of people said that to me. They would always be like, if you want to do it your way, you should start your own company. And they say it to you in different ways, but ultimately they're preparing you, they're changing your behaviors to look at things differently, combined with your ability to want to look at things differently and to ask questions and to want to defy things. And I think that led me into the space. I tried my hand at a bunch of stuff. You fail a lot. But I was a kid. I'm talking about 16 years old failing, 18 years old failing, 19 years old failing. But eventually you start to click and things start to happen. And then you wind up in a business that starts to take off. Mine was Digital Surgeons originally.
So was Digital Surgeons your first business that kind of you cemented and started to grow? Or what were the ones you tried before that? What were some of the failed companies you had?
Oh, I mean, I did all types of things. I tried to join. I mostly were things that I joined onto. So I was latching on to be a co-founder and try to help and be more of an entrepreneur, right? It wasn't my idea. But so even the company right before Digital Surgeons was in the digital marketing space. It's where I learned about digital marketing. And basically they did search engine optimization, and it was the wild west of that business, right? It was like 2002. People were scamming the engines. Black hat techniques were all over the place. No one really understood what it was to manipulate websites to get them to the top of the search engines for particular keywords. So ultimately, I was there and I saw that I had impact, and I saw that there was a really high growth rate to these businesses. So now I see a pathway to, right, the same question: how do we make more money? How do we get paid? And and really the leadership didn't see it my way, but I tried to tie myself to the total company performance, which is essentially taking an equity position in it, even if it's a percentage of gross profits or an exit. And we just hit a wall, and it didn't work, and it didn't work because of a lot of reasons, right? The business model, leadership, vision, and so on and so forth. And then I meet Pete, and we build a relationship. And I think that's a real critical part, is that we built a relationship and then went into business and went through those trials and tribulations and the journey and the roller coaster. I always talk about business as a roller coaster. You got to strap in. I'm proud now to say, through all the ups and downs, through all the people that doubt us, through all the people that have given us sort of grief about the way that we've operated, we've been in business for 16 years. Like, say what you want. 16 years. And if you look at the portfolio growth off of that 16 years and what else has been accomplished or what we're working on or how we're looking at the world, I think it only goes to show, like, we're really just getting started.
Yeah. And originally you started off Bootstrap, right? When you started the business with Pete, how did that come into play? Were you scared to put in the initial investment, or is it something that just felt so right? Because obviously building a business like that is intimidating. And as you said, lots of people were doubting you. How did you overcome those emotions and that external pressure?
Well, for starters, I think you have to have some amount of, you have to be rooted in somewhat reality of like where you're starting from. For us, I didn't come from money. Pete didn't come from money. So what is up, right? It's like steady, get a salary, make good money. I was making good money at my company. Like I was in the world of like, I was 26 years old. I was making good money. We wanted to actually raise capital and see if we could bring some capital in to help us grow. Unfortunately, through events, which I've learned, one of my advisors once told me, all deals take 6 months and deals never happen. If you set your expectations that things are going to be much longer and they're not going to happen, then you actually can give the right amount of energy to it. And energy not only to get the job done, but energy to expend if you lose. Because if you get deflated, if you get kicked down, if you get a loss, how you rebound from that loss, how quickly you stand up, how quickly you keep moving forward momentum. Pete and I talk about being forward obsessed, right? You get punched, you take it, and you keep going forward. If you sort of expect that, things will be okay. So we tried to raise money, got punched in the face. Basically, the guy that said I was going to give you money, the guy that circled money in the round that would have kicked us off, died. And huge setback, on top of the fact that he was just a cool individual that had so much knowledge and experience, right? Mentors, networks, that's important in entrepreneurship. But long story short is that happened. So now you basically, it's fight or flight, right? Are we going to run away and not do what we wanted to do? Or are we going to pick ourselves up by our straps and keep it moving? And that's what we did. So we put $5,000 in the bank. And that was a risk for us, right? So you talk about like, were you scared? I wasn't. Pete's a little bit more risk adverse than me, right? Like I come from nothing. I'm a son of an immigrant, didn't grow up with anything. I remember scrounging through the couch for coins to buy things, right? As a kid. To me, those investments, when I make them on myself and I'm sort of betting, I feel very, very confident.
Yeah, and based on that, obviously taking that loss with the person who's going to help you passing away, how did you gain your first clients? How did you get that first revenue in the door?
So we had a client walking in the door right away, and that was just through some pre-work, some networking between Pete and I, but it wasn't a big client. What we did was so the guy that passed away, name was Bill, he said to me, fast nickels are better than slow dimes. And what he was saying at the time was, you got to get cash up, right? You got to get the ball rolling. So you got to be a little less selective and you got to lower your threshold for business. And that's what we did. So we joined the Chamber of Commerce locally, and we hit the streets, and we're going to the networking events. And also, Pete and I were crazy. We wrote a 450-page website and like had this, and I mean, we were everything to everybody, and it was SEO to death. We had so much real, like internet real estate that we created this flywheel of business and opportunities for us to just have people on phones answering and qualifying stuff. But for us, it was like $500 projects, $2,000 projects, right? Eventually, you create new hurdles, right? And I remember those times where it was like, hey, we're tapped out, we got to hurdle up, no projects under 10,000. Hey, we're tapped out, we got to hurdle up, no projects under 30,000. Now we're doing those numbers a month. Like that's the hurdle for just 30 days of working with us now. If I could go back and teach a lesson, it would be change your hurdles faster, right? Like you get too comfortable, and I think you waste too much time. But it's a balance. You don't want to go too fast because then you fall down and you trip and fall on your face. But definitely have be a little bit more aggressive about that is something that I would have done differently. Or if you have cash, it's a different story. If you have the cash flow to back yourself, and you can be much more selective, you'll get to a better result faster. But it's going to be much scarier on the way up because your investment's much larger, right? We had no money, so we had to hustle a different way than we would do today if we had cash flow and money to start the company.
Yeah, and I think that's a common problem with many entrepreneurs is that they undercharge at the beginning because there's that fear factor, there's that imposter syndrome of, is what we're doing worth this amount of money? And there's this idea that somebody's mentioned before that where you shouldn't charge what you think you deserve. You should charge what it's worth. Because sometimes if you charge what you think you deserve, you're going to undercharge. Because you might think that it's not worth what other people think it's worth. And you've got to look at the market, what are people willing to pay? Because you've got to assume people aren't idiots, right? They're willing to pay you that amount because they think you can deliver. They believe in you. And it's, as you said, if you can charge the rates that your work is worth, that would mean that you then have to have a lot less stress in trying to get other clients and trying to do all this scrambling around, which allows you to then deliver a better product. So it's kind of self-fulfilling. If you get a high ticket client or clients, then because you don't have to worry about hustling for like $100 or $200 or $500 projects, you have that clarity of mind to really deliver. And then that then snowballs and gets you bigger clients and so on.
So yes, the thing is, like, again, being like the guy that loves the entrepreneur, that knows like the different phases of it, right? Pete and I were 26 and 24 years old. We didn't understand what it was worth yet. So we were also just almost like people were paying us for us to get the proof of concept, right? We were selling things and learning them on the go because we were imposters. Neither one of us ran a business like this. We didn't know anybody. We didn't know how to find those mentors. We didn't have cash to pay people. So this was truly trial by fire. So you're unfortunately learning on the job, which is again, it's all about where you come from as you get to the journey. Everybody's path is going to be very different. So I don't think it's one size fits all in that. Now, 1000%. I very rarely think about selling per hour, selling time, or anything like that. I think like if you just raised $50 million at a $300 million valuation, and you want to redo and you want to build a product, build a service, find an innovation, whatever the service is that you're helping that, or consult is that you're helping that business with, you got to figure out like, what is this worth not fucking up? Excuse my language. You can beep those out or you can leave them. I'm totally fine with cursing. By the way, so you could either. So I think for me, it's what does that number look like from a safe perspective? What are you willing to pay cash, and what are you willing to incentivize me with on winning? And I want that number to be included. And if we can't get to that established agreement, then I don't want to work with you, right? The biggest thing I think is that entrepreneurs are not always comfortable when they're in a position of weakness or lack of knowledge, if they're ignorant to a particular topic, to truly understand the value that you're giving them. Like I had a startup who I love, who was like, hey, I can't give you this much equity because of these reasons. And then I went back a year later, I go back to them and I said, hey, so the guy that did give it to me is now 10 times as more valuable in 1 year's time. Where are you? Right? And I know that I had a huge impact inside of that growth. And I think that that's the big problem with some people, where they're just like, they get in their way, right? It's the same thing as, I give you another great example for entrepreneurs is location, right? A lot of entrepreneurs will go for the cheaper lease when they open up a retail store or any type of retail environment. They'll go with the cheaper lease, not realizing the value of a high traffic anchored position inside of real estate, right? That the value of the advertising, the foot traffic, and so on and so forth is much, much more valuable. They're unable to connect those dots. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I do think there's nuance to what you said and how you approach it versus the point of the journey, and also what it means to really know your worth and the value of what you're selling.
And I think it's, like I said, at the beginning, it's very difficult to know that. It's very difficult to know what your service is worth to the potential clients. And it's something which I've had a problem with as well, is how do I price this correctly? And sometimes I've had in the past where I've suggested a figure and the person said yes instantly. It's like, I probably priced that too low because they didn't even need to think about it. It was that easy for them. You want to have there to be at least like, a moment when they need to think at least. And that's one way I'm using to almost help determine what things are worth.
Asking the right questions is a skill in itself, because a lot of people, no matter how professional they are, no matter how confident they are, when it comes to asking very personal questions or questions that you perceive as personal, they will shy away from a particular question, right? Like asking somebody, how much money do you have in your pocket, is difficult to ask. But my father taught me never be afraid of the answer, right? And if you're not afraid of the answer, then you can ask the question. So I think one of the things to get to value, you found a mechanism where you're like, I'm just going to feel this one out. I like to ask a lot of questions, right? Like, how much did you raise? Who'd you raise it from? What are your bet? Like, I've given different scenarios, but like getting into the sauce, so to speak, like how many, what's your cap table look like? What kind of constraints is your capital under? Can you fully realize the round without hitting benchmarks? Now, all of a sudden, you start to get to something, right? I had a startup. They said we need 20,000 signups by this time. So time constraint is tight, number is big. And I'm like, great. How much is that worth to you? And they're like, well, tell us, give us a proposal. And I'm like, well, a proposal is either going to have a number and vague services, or which you're not going to like, or it's going to have teeth to it and deliverables, and I'm going to price them against what I think it's going to take to win. And if you don't like the number, then I wasted my time. So, and I'm not going to be happy. So why don't you tell me what it's worth? Like, if you get that, how much money are you raising in the next round? How much revenue are you forecasting that you'll make off of it? And then let's back it out to a value number. And I'll say, okay, we're gonna need 25% of that in fee, 50% of that in media, I'm going in consulting fees or what have you to get to that number. A lot of people are not prepared to have that conversation, right? So that's a little bit more for me. Ask more questions instead of just firing and testing is something that I've learned over the years.
Right at the beginning, you were more consulting with digital surgeons, right? But as you said, over time, you're more taking on equity. Was that always something you wanted to do from the very start? Or was that something which, as you grew in confidence and you were asking for equity when you were working in different companies? How did that process work and that mindset shift happen?
I'd say I was always interested in equity because of the concept of being an entrepreneur, but I wasn't thinking about it in terms of services, equity, and investment capital as a construct across the board, right? I wasn't thinking about that until a few years later. And it started with, hey, can we build products on our own that we come up with? And then it became sort of, okay, that was fun. We're not ready for that. Let's instead partner with people that have products and empower them. That's a place of love, right? Like if you find someone that's really passionate about their business, it has a champion, it has a top hunter, and you can fill a role. If you're the champion for that business, and every single business that you create, you're going to starve to death, right? And actually, one of my favorite sayings is the hunter that chases two rabbits goes hungry, right? So it's something that we've shifted from building products to backing people. We're now actually going back into building products again, but because we're much more mature, we have capital now, we know how to, we're investing, we're thinking about it differently. But when you didn't, it was services and equity. And I think that's evolved over time. And so the answer is sort of always there, and the passion for it and how we've done it has really evolved over the 16 years. I'd say over the last 12 years, really. We probably had a couple of years of just service, and then we started to move into more equity and building and whatnot.
You mentioned there about like backing people. Is there none in particular you want to highlight where you can say like you worked with them because you love their business so much and you wanted to empower them? And what happened with their story?
Oh, I mean, all the time. I mean, we have so many. Our most recent ones, Hue, which is the cannabis company, which we backed. The founder came to me and he had this IP and he had this passion that he had developed for the plant, cannabis. It was perfect matchup. I have big passion for the plant. I believe in the industry, and I could tell his pedigree and what he knew was such a compliment and difference to what I did. So it just made perfect sense. And I was very excited about that. You have to be excited about the people way more than the idea. That to me, that's a prerequisite. So I had both. I did that with another friend of mine who was the CMO of a really large national accounting firm. And he stepped down and we backed him on a consultancy for professional service companies. I like working with him. Like he and I had a business meeting today while we hit the heavy bag and did like kickboxing and stuff. And we had a great meeting because he's active and he's a fighter, right? He's got that sort of energy to him. Technology companies that we've backed, Tony Lee from what was Fresh Nation. He was the guy that told me all deals take 6 months and deals never happen, right? He had a certain energy to him, a certain way of thinking and modeling business, and coming up with business models and whatnot. Think about that champion in a certain way, fall in love with them, be able to have a good relationship with them. Because if you're going to back them, you have to be able to create tension with them. Right? And that happens often. And if you don't, it's unlikely to be successful.
Yeah. And along the way, were there any companies where you felt really passionate about, but then they didn't work how you expected? And what hard lessons did you learn along the way?
Good question. Don't fall in love with the product or the product, service, concept, idea first. It blinds you. It blinds you to the people. You miss the signals. That's number one. Number two is really, really like drill down and ask the questions repeatedly, back to questions, right? Really get into the agreements that you're making with that person. If you're giving them money, what your expectations are, what their expectations are. I see that's the biggest thing is these things break down because of communication. And again, if you can't go into the tension zone and come out and grow, then that's going to be a real problem. So I think, really asking those questions and making those agreements. My job is going to do this. That is what I'm going to do. That is my value. This is what I can bring to the table. If you need this, I am not your guy. If you need this, I'm not your girl. Whatever you need to say. I think that's really important because it's partnership, right? It is partnership. It's a relationship in some capacity, just ways of working, how you want to be spoken to. And sometimes you have to have a blowout. Like I've literally gotten into massive, don't talk to me. This is not the right time right now. You've passed the point of pissing me off. And I think it's better we shut this down and reopen it in, 24 to 48 hours when things are cooled down. You got to be able to do that. You got to be able to say that in those partnerships. I've had issues where they didn't do that, and that's what hurt, right? You move too fast, and all of a sudden you're like, I should have asked these questions, and then you feel like at a place of disadvantage. You should also sort of have. I've learned to sort of build rules for negotiating. For example, one person taught me that you should never offer, if you're trying to partner with somebody, you should never offer them a deal that you wouldn't take, right? And versus the concept of like, oh, how much do you want to pay me for that service? How much do you want to pay me for that particular part of the business? Oh, $100? Okay, great. I'll do it for $200. right? It's like, hey, that's absurd. Or you saying, I'll charge you $100 to do this particular thing in business, and I try to lowball you and say, I'll give you 10, right? It's not, it's that sort of machismo negotiation tactic in partnerships is just not a place to live. And that's getting investors and doing all of the things, right? Any part of the romanticness of the business in general has no place for that style tactic, in my opinion. It puts people in a defensive position. It creates enemies. It creates an energy that I don't think belongs in business, or at least in the businesses that I work on.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's so important is that behind the businesses, behind the ideas, behind the products, there's always people. And it's the people who've got to execute the idea. It doesn't matter how good the idea is if the right people aren't behind it and it's not the right team of people either. Because as you said there, where with one of the products you worked with, is that the founder had different skills to what you had. So you had the same passion for different skills, and that's what worked well. You mentioned that you're going back into products again with like your own products rather than collaborating with somebody else. What's made you go into those particular areas, and how are those going so far?
So things are going well so far. We're just in the very early stages. What we're focused on are ancillary products or things that will boost up the core business and assets. So we had a studio in-house. We're building out our second stage now. Essentially, I'll call it a second stage. So we've got lighting guys coming in this week to check out the cages and all the things that we need to do to produce way more content. Pete coined the phrase years ago called growth as a service, which I loved. But we didn't focus on like really coining that phrase and like leaning in hard on it. So now we're looking at developing a content studio that's separate from the agency, that's going to be open for more people to shoot content in our building, because we have the campus here district that we built. So that's one. Two is we're starting to play in the Metaverse, in the NFT space with products. So when we do those types of products, it's sort of like a no-lose situation for us, because what we do typically is innovation focused, so it gets attention. That innovation and that attention leads to the type of work and relationships that we want in the future. So it's sort of a lab space where we know we're learning, we know that we're getting attention, that there's a high propensity for this concept and idea to get attention. We believe it's sellable, and it's either sellable as a moment, like a PR moment, or it's sellable as an actual product, and there's commercial practice to it. And we're much more mature about knowing what is and what isn't and what the value is. Yeah, so we're moving down that, as well as thinking about like future products for the other businesses like District and so on.
You mentioned District there. What was the motivation behind building District, and how did you go about that?
So Pete and I had an idea when we first started the company to build a building that acted as a collective of artists and writers and creative people that we wanted to be around. That was in 2006, 2007. We tried to get it off the ground, but a number of little, we made a tiny effort, and we had a number of roadblocks, and we were just like, okay, we need to focus here, and scrapped it. Years later, we bounced around from office to office growing. You have this room, then you have 2 rooms, and you have 2 rooms and a bathroom, and you just keep moving around, expanding your footprint. We were serendipitous situation. The building, we were in a warehouse, it got sold. The guy didn't have the vision or the appetite for what we were presenting as a vision. So I went out to look for a space with the intention of hopefully acquiring something and getting into real estate for us. That turned out to be very difficult until one night I was looking at a satellite image of the area we were in, and I noticed this abandoned bus depot that the government owned. It was a state-owned asset. So long story short is, big vision on the spot, sort of, we could do this. That was the idea that I came up with, this huge idea around a campus with a beer garden and an amphitheater and a restaurant and a walking trail and all this crazy, crazy stuff that night. And then the next day I put it into motion and figured out a way to get this thing up on the block for us to acquire. That turned into a proposal that we had prepared called District, with the concept that I described. And we bid $1 to acquire the property. And the most competitive bid against us was $3.1 million. And we won for $1. So we actually bought District for $1 because of the vision. And then from there, making the vision, executing, to your point before, executing on that vision was the next massive hurdle that we had to go through, which was figuring out how to finance it. Turned out to be, it's a $25 million building. We financed it in finding special financing vehicles. We designed, creative directed and designed the building with our architecture partners and engineering partners, and then executed on that from a general contracting perspective, and then did the marketing and sort of piecing together the community around this building and executed that really, really well. So services are top notch. It's got a fitness facility with multi-modality fitness, spinning, yoga, locker rooms. It's just an awesome facility, and we executed on that to do something for the community, and it's been phenomenal so far. Really, really good. It's been everything that we thought it'd be from the very start.
Yeah, and when you looked at that community, so you mentioned before the call how community is so important to you. How did you build that in? So obviously you've got, I guess, everybody at Digital Surgeons, well, a lot of them might be based in the building as well. But how did you try to attract the right kind of people to build that community of like-minded people? There
was two pieces to that. One is sort of outbound communication, how we presented, right? So we were trying to present a young energy. We were trying to present not a tech, everybody called us a technology campus at first. And I actually would correct them and I'd say tech and innovation campus, because innovation is thinking differently, right? It's not about technology. It could be tech enabled, but it could be content done differently. It could be communications innovations and so on and so forth. So we established that and then put out a lot of that content and rhetoric. We have a billboard that's on our property that we were using with very clever sort of whimsical pieces and ad creative, and we were in the right places. That's number one. Number two is when people came to join us or to tour with us, we would ask a question. Why do you want to be here? And that's not what real estate people do, right? And there's a big distinction between real estate development, we get calls by real estate developers all the time. Do you want to be a district? Can we build you a district? Do you want to come to this town, this city, this state? All the time. But they don't get it. You have to care. You have to be concerned with you can be concerned about the commercials, but you also have to be really concerned about the community, because the community is the nucleus of this. By asking the question why, people will show you their true colors as to, I'm looking to be inspired versus I'm looking to get wired, right? I'm trying to build my network and wire into something new. That's good. You should want to do that, but you should be talking about inspiration. You should be talking about giving, not getting. You should be talking about work. I feel like this is the energy that I need to get my job done. And we sort of set those parameters, not just those parameters. We have all values and everything. And we told people no, a lot of people. And that sacrifice that we made by saying no ultimately created the success that we have today.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned as well before the call that you're now fully booked, more or less. It's almost everything is taken. And obviously that's very impressive, especially with COVID and everything that's happened there. And you said you managed to survive that. One thing would be really interesting to know is there anybody you've met through District that has helped your business or given you a new opportunity, or even maybe just taught you something that you never expected?
I mean, District has incredible value to everybody here, the whole community. For me, it's made my network and my community much more well-rounded. I've met a significant, it's not just the types of people that I think I would typically meet. That's number one. Number two, from a opportunity standpoint, right? I was giving for all those years. And then, just this year alone, I've been introduced, we have the largest early stage venture capital firm in the state of Connecticut, as far as most deals are concerned. They're headquartered here now, right? So the money's here, the opportunities are here, right? You're in the right, energy. You're in the right rooms at the right time. You're witnessing the right people doing the right things, or doing the things that are right to you. and I think that sort of dynamic and the feeling that presents to everybody is something that I always believed in, and I had an intuition about. But now that I see it and I feel it, and I hear it all the time, everybody walks in and they talk about energy.
Yeah. And going back to what you said about people seeking inspiration rather than to build their network, I think it's a really important point which sometimes people overlook, because when people say, for example, your network is your net worth, I think there's sometimes an issue there. Some people can interpret that as you need to talk to people because that will make you more money. Whereas often what I find happens is that you talk to people because they're fascinating, because you enjoy talking to them, and then opportunities then come out of that. But if you're talking to them purely because you want to use them or see them as dollar signs, they're probably not going to want to work with you. So it's almost that taking the longer path, but the path where you really connect with someone on a human level, will lead to the longer term success than just trying to use them essentially. And I think we kind of share that value there. And that's what District is built upon.
Yeah, if community is the nucleus, right? I'll give you an example. WeWork didn't fail because what they created was bad. It's the stuff on the outside that failed. The nucleus of WeWork was a community which they did well. They did really, really well. I was inspired by WeWork because I was in one of their early offices. We had an office in New York City. I saw that there were pieces missing. Community can be broken down into micro communities. If you think about micro communities so WeWork had one community, but they weren't thinking about the ancillary communities that build off of those, at least from on the outside, where we focused on community with a capital C, and looked at it as all these micro nodes, and I think that those are people. Bottom line, right? COVID hit. I was like, all right, we have bathroom doors. Like, no one's going to want to touch those. Like, let's adjust that user experience. Everybody can use their foot now. Where are the stations for sanitizer, which was important. But more important was like, hey, let's go with touchless doors. Let's the doors open by themselves, right? Let's get somebody in here to fix that. To try and show people like, hey, we're going to create a better environment for you because we get it, right? And then when we're done doing that, we're going to help you forget because it's such a harsh, COVID's turned into such a harsh thing for people's mental well-being, that if we can like put you at ease by bringing back events slowly and making them safe and doing this and doing that, people really admired that. And again, it goes back to people instead of I'm trying to get money from you, I'm trying to take from you, I'm going to give you a ton of value. And I believe that you're going to give that back to me in love and loyalty and revenues that hold up everything. And I'm going to be able to make a reasonable profit, right? That's a good agreement.
And I think so many people listening today as well, they'll be at the early stages of their business where maybe it's just them, or maybe it's them and a couple other people, and they haven't got a physical office yet. And one of the things I think sometimes people might not realize is how isolating entrepreneurship can sometimes be, especially if you're working by yourself or if it's just you and one other person. It's quite tough in that way because, especially if you've worked at a company previously, you've got colleagues, you've got a team, you've got people above you. So if something goes wrong, you can go to them. Whereas when you're an entrepreneur, everything's on you. If you don't do something, then you don't get paid. And that's quite a harsh living situation for many people. And it's something which I found as well, where I was originally working from home when I started doing my own thing. And now I am using a WeWork and I'm looking at other membership places as well. So I'm based in London. So hopefully there's somewhere like District in London soon. But it's looking at that. Like, I need that kind of community around me where people can relate to what I'm doing. Because otherwise it does feel quite isolating. It can get quite lonely. And I'm sure there's people listening today who feel that way. And when you're looking at where to work or how to build that community, it is looking at it from a community aspect of the happier you are, the better you feel in your environment. That's going to lead to your business success rather than just where can I go where people will help me, or where can I go where people will do this or do that. So I think that's like really good what you've done there with District, and it's hopefully helping a lot of people in that environment.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's something to be said for seeing people, right? If you hear from somebody that walks through the front door, it's a big building, right? It's huge. Somebody walks through the front door and says, like, I've heard people say, I want to work here. And I'm like, find a company or start one, right? We have 200 companies here. find a company or start one. There's opportunities. I hear things all the time. This guy failed and he got hired to be this in this company. This guy's starting this, and all of a sudden he grew to 5 people, and he just offered somebody in the building an opportunity. And all these things happen, and it's natural, and it's meaningful, and it's coming from a good place. Usually, right? If we design well, it comes from a good place, and then. Again, I attribute it to energy. It comes down to just that as the purest thing. People walk in and say, "Oh, I want to be here. I want to work harder. I feel like I could be productive here." That's before they even see what the desk is going to look like and what the cost is, or who the networks are, and the chat rooms, and the event calendar, and all that kind of stuff. It just is it's an aura. It's almost palpable. I believe in it that much.
And you mentioned earlier as well, like you're not looking at London right now, but you are looking at expanding and creating more offices like this. How's that process going, and what's on your mind, and what's the decisions you're making in that space?
It's going very, very slowly. That's the one thing I've learned here, is that everybody thinks it's easy, which is why we catch people, architects, developers, real estate people come in, take pictures, measure stuff. I've seen them measure the thickness of walls. Like, I mean, it's amazing, right? We see them on the cameras, 3 people taking pictures of, like, what did they do here and how did they do this? Because they see the design, they see the physical design, right? They're not seeing the internal design. They're not also seeing, like, other things. Our location is so amazing, and no one saw it coming, right? Because some people are blinded by things like highways and neighborhoods and lines and stuff like that. So really slow in that way. COVID's become obviously a big thing, so you have to adjust some of your strategies. And then it's the opportunity size, right? What can you acquire the property for? What is the market going to bear? I think that the more patient you can be, the better your returns can be. Like, our returns are, seriously healthy returns. But if all goes well, we should see significant returns. If you measure those returns, they're the type of returns that are 2, 3, 4x what a traditional investor's thinking about. And that's what makes it so I want to repeat that, because I know the formula. So I don't want to rush into it and just take on small jobs to have as much stress with much less return.
And then beyond district and the real estate side, what are the other things you're building for the future that are exciting you?
My baby, one of my favorite companies that I'm working with right now is Hue, the cannabis business. It's based on IP in and around a new form of inhalation, dry herb vaping. We're targeting effects instead of thinking about it with strain names and stuff like that. So helping you fall asleep, helping you relax, helping you bounce back after a workout. I'm really excited about that. We've had some early indicators that the market is really ripe for it. We're getting, inbound requests for distributors and sales all over the world already. Italy, Mexico, we've gotten all over the United States. I'm helping the leadership quite a bit. I'm invested in it. I'm a board member. I'm working hard for the people that have invested in the company to help advise it head in the right direction. And I'm also really excited about that category as in general. I mean, the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate on that industry is enormous, right? It's in the 20s.
Perfect. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, David. Where can people listening today hear more about you and what you're up to?
All the platforms I'm on: Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm at iGrowBrands is my handle for Twitter and Instagram. Instagram is more about some of my obsessions, some business, some sneakers. I love sneakers. I have a sneaker problem. Business-wise, LinkedIn, I'm David Salinas. Hue.co for cannabis business. Digitalsurgeons.com, districtnhv.com are a couple of the handles where you can find me. TikTok. I'm still playing with TikTok. I mostly do dances with my daughter. So